Yeah, it's ironic that Jiminy Cricket is such an advocate of human supremacy, given that he's basically just like debasing himself. But he does wear clothes, so he's at least humanoid and kind of gets his share, like by association. Hello and welcome to the Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Baumeister, and with me and us today is my friend Ivo Martin. Ivo, how you doing, dude?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's nice to be on here.
All right. Yeah, well, it's nice to have you. Tell us about who you are. Like, introduce yourself, and then we'll establish more about how we know each other and what our common basis in philosophy and life is.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Ivo. I'm 25 years old and currently doing my master's in English and philosophy ethics, as well as education of science, to become a teacher in Germany for the Gymnasium, which is something like a high school, middle school, high school, preparing students for their A levels.
But that's also like where you go to train, right? Like the gym, like you pump iron and do gymnastics there.
Well, most of the high schools or the gymnasiums have also a gym.
Okay.
And yes, but I'm not a physical education teacher. I'm doing philosophy and English as well.
Okay, very good. Those two things, and you're so you're like you're a teacher in training, right? So
yes,
which is I see that as a noble place to be in life. I know it's also a difficult one, and in the U.S. at least, it's very difficult to become a teacher. In many ways, it's very grueling. Often the rewards, especially if you stay in the public school system, are dwindling, and there are many pressures and things. So people who willingly choose to become teachers in certain contexts, I think there must be something driving them other than comfort or profit or whatnot. Would you say that's the case with you as well? Or, I mean, I know in Germany it's a bit juicier. It's like my partner's a teacher, and it's like I think it's easier in Germany to make the argument that it's like a stable, like solid career. But how do you see it? Why are you going into that?
Yeah, there's two parts. I think there's a difference between the US and Germany when it comes to education generally, and also like the privatization and the government side of education in a sense. But I think first and foremost, I love being a learner and an educator, and delving into topics and fascinating myself with those topics and trying to give it to others, to students. Mm-hmm. And I think philosophy is a great starting point for that, to delve into various different fields. And I think we're alike in that way. Like you have done philosophy with a lot of different people, I assume. With you do children's philosophy, you do philosophy with seniors as well.
Yes, yeah, across the age spectrum.
How's that?
Yeah, from cradle to grave. That's how I see it. So. But it is interesting thinking about it in that broad spectrum, about how philosophy education works and how broad it can be, or what counts as education and what counts as philosophy. And just to say that in prior to my moving to Germany, the philosophy that I did was primarily academic. It's like I decided to become a philosophy major when I started university, and I studied with philosophy PhDs, the professors and things. And I got a PhD myself, and all along was reading philosophy and thinking about philosophy and talking with philosophers. But then I think that if you do that so much that you've become blind to the fact that philosophy isn't just in academia, and that really all that is, that's the profession of philosophy. And it's people who make a profession or attempt to kind of make a living, and some do and some don't, out of thinking about and talking about philosophy. But that's not like a zoo where philosophy lives there and doesn't live elsewhere. That's now, I think that's quite ridiculous, that philosophy is broader. It's all over the place. There may be experts, but those experts, they're often just talking to each other. So It is, I think, very refreshing and healthy to see philosophy as something that anybody can do and that you can talk to anybody about. Now, if you, like, you and I, if you also study philosophy and think explicitly about philosophy, then you can often draw that out of those conversations and engagements that you might have with, say, like a 3-year-old or like a 98-year-old. But often those conversations, they can still be philosophical without having to be defined in terms of philosophy. That's just, in a way, that's like an artificial imposition. So I think if you approach it that way, then anything is like possible. And but it is an interesting mission to think about philosophy in that broader sense. Let me throw the ball back at you. How do you feel, and what's your sense of how philosophy fits institutionally in the German educational system? Like, why is it the case that it's even there? Do you think that that's a good place for it? From an American perspective, it seems quite generous to philosophy, because we hardly have any philosophy in high school curriculums, and even in college curriculums. It's usually present at liberal arts colleges and in certain ways in other spaces, but it's very, it becomes more and more fringe and into its own corner. So just the idea that it's at this broader level of accessibility, like more students encounter it in gymnasiums than do at universities. What do you see about that?
So I think there's a pragmatic answer to that question, which is that in Germany, historically, there's been a lot of religious education. So it's not like France, where religious education and schools, for instance, are separate. So I think it had also to do with the history of migration to Germany, where people would come that aren't Christians and wouldn't want to go into the classrooms of this religious education subject. And therefore, there was an alternative created, which is ethics in a sense, and which varies, as you told, in the different federal systems of Germany. But more and more students are doing now this religious alternative, which is ethics, in which each of the religions are discussed. But then we also get to the philosophical parts and discussions and contents of religions, as well as all the other ideas of how to discuss morality and happiness and purpose. And I think that's a trend that is only growing. So there's more and more students. There's even an ambition or a movement which is stronger in the north of Germany, I would say, to just get rid of the religious education in the school system and rather extend the ethics classes, to have everybody in the same class doing basically philosophy in a sense. Yeah, I think that's one answer to it. So it's also a lot of politics.
In some sense, for both those reasons that you laid out, they're pragmatic, which is just also to say that they come out of, like, there's a practical reason why they're there. They kind of fill a gap or provide a solution to a problem in the world. It's not that there's some background justification that, like, you can imagine this. Like, Schiller argued for this, in his letters on the aesthetic education of humans or whatever, like these classical German buildings models that would have more philosophy as like every human needs it to develop their soul, and harmonize with this or that or something like this kind of. But it's just that we already had religion on the books for its own reasons, but we don't want to force everybody to take religion so they can have this alternative that's like secularized religion, that's philosophy, we have a bunch of people with migration backgrounds, and often that correlates with different religious backgrounds. But it's just interesting that in both cases, I wonder, is that even really like full philosophy? It's kind of like philosophy is like serving a purpose in a way, and maybe it does, but it's not there for its own sake, I guess, is one critique I have of the system.
Yeah, maybe I made the contrast too hard. So in the religious education, the classes that existed or are done here, They also talk about Kant. They also talk about the other religions, about varying ethical positions,
Okay.
but done by people who studied theology. And in their study of theology, they also did some philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I gave the pragmatic answer, maybe also because I just did a seminar which disillusioned me a bit in the sense of the conflict between the humanistic idealism that is associated with religion, and on the other hand, the
Mm-hmm.
economic purpose or project of an education system. If we look at the OECD studies or the PISA studies, who try to figure out what are the core competencies that students should have, not for being students in life or
Mm-hmm.
following this humanistic ideal, but rather as being flexible workers for a market that these countries need. So
Yes.
often in the education plans that I also need to study, there is the preamble, which is quite idealistic and talking about
Mm-hmm.
humanistic ideals of autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
reflection in students. But then if it gets more specific, it turns to other qualities that get less
Mm-hmm.
idealistic and rather more pragmatic, I think.
And that are more like skills based or so, like or competencies that connect directly with like labor market demands. Probably also like English is probably justified that way, right? It's like, you know, you mentioned teaching English, and as far as I understand, English is like a compulsory subject at many levels, at like Realschule as well. What's like German and
Mhm.
English and math are
Yeah.
maybe the big three in Baden-Württemberg. Is that right? So
Yes. Yes.
and why is it that English there? You know, it's not because of Shakespeare, right? It's like the economic value of that language, right? So that is interesting. Like where, so maybe do you see philosophy as connecting more with the preamble or then with that? I don't know. Maybe I guess it does. It's both.
Yeah, it's both. It's both. And also there's a paradox in there. If you want to prepare students for a future, the problem is you can never know how that future turns out and what to prepare them for.
That's the thing. It's like, what does philosophy prepare someone to be or to do? Like if you,
Mm.
and you know, not a, you don't have to be like a weirdo like you and I say, or people who actually, again, who like spend a lot of time studying philosophy. Because I think that the thesis is to do philosophy or to be a philosopher or to get something out of engagement with philosophy, like in a class that might be your one and only time, or even just like reading a book or watching a YouTube video, like one encounter with something about philosophy, that then presumes that you don't have to do it all the time for it to be valuable. It's not like you have to really understand it perfectly or have some detailed view of it. Um, it's this something that you can encounter and then somehow you take it forward, or it prepares you for something. But one thing I'd like to add in there is like, what do you think of the idea of like it providing like civic virtues? Because I think in the U.S. American context, you'd more be likely to see philosophy, if you do, more in the context of rhetoric and debate teams and argumentation, and that philosophy teaches critical thinking skills, and you know, how to construct an argument and all this. And that goes at university level philosophy, but even in the sense of how philosophy justifies itself in society. It's interesting that in Germany, and I think this just reflects national differences of the, you know, the scope that philosophy is allowed to have and the history of it, but that philosophy plays a moral role or an ethical role. It's like connected with ethics. And what I find it a little humorous, actually, as somebody like a non-German philosopher living in Germany, but it seems that the presumption of the German education system is that studying philosophy makes you a better person, or that you can, it's like good if you study it, it'll contribute to you being better. I don't think that's always true. It's like, why would we assume that? But I don't know. What do you think about any of that?
I think if you study philosophy, you're at least aware of some moral positions that could guide you in your life. Although there's also studies that show that even professors of philosophy will leave a man who seems to have a heart attack alone if they're late for their lecture. But I think, yeah,
Absolutely.
Germany has a history of understanding themselves as philosophers and thinkers. I think Kant, for instance, has a great influence till today. And just yesterday, I was at a political discussion where the head of the state of Baden-Württemberg was at the university, and there was a lot of, well, he cited Kant.
Is that Kretschmeyer or Kretsch? Yes, it's one of the Kretschs,
Kretschmann.
Right? Kretschmann, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right, yeah. He cited Kant.
He had to, in a sense, because I think that's the German philosopher, and that's what Germans like to understand themselves as part of a tradition they're in.
Yeah. Sorry, Hegel. Sorry, Hegel-Haus Museum. It's interesting or just to think about. And it's like, what is that a legitimate place or not? I'm not saying that's bad. I think that gives philosophy like a legitimate place. And I think you can trace that through in like technical philosophy in Germany, through like Frankfurt School critical theory, through German phenomenology, this kind of reverence for that maybe is rooted in Kant of like, if you're a rational philosopher, you can also be a rational actor and a moral actor. And that it's almost implied that they go hand in hand. But at the same time, there's also a tradition, even in German philosophy, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, but then a lot of other global philosophies. I think even Socrates, like stemming back to the origins of Western philosophy, like who want to say that, yeah, it's not that it necessarily makes you better, but doing good and thinking about the good aren't necessarily the same. Maybe it's not to say that philosophy is immoral, but that it is potentially amoral. And I see that as a little bit maybe more radical. So then what does it mean to teach a child philosophy? And this is like how I do that at the Hegel-Haus once a month. So this Saturday, I've got one that's like a philosophy puppet show. It's like with these finger puppets and hand puppets. And the target group are like 3 to 8-year-olds. But I often think about it. It's like, what am I trying to convey to the students or they're not students, but the kids, like about, say, nature or about friendship or about love or about happiness or any sort of thing. Am I trying to teach them that like love is good and they should love themselves? Or am I open to teaching them in a more broader philosophical way that would entertain also the idea that, well, maybe love's not so good, or love's just a fantasy, that illusion that we've created in modernity to pacify ourselves from the crushing brutality of our consumerist industrial lives, you know?
I think the ideal that one as an educator might have is to get the kids to make up their own mind and do philosophy in a sense that they find their own position on moral questions or questions of aesthetic or even of metaphysics in a sense. And doing that as an educator, I think interesting here is another discussion that I've been following recently, which is more about educators teaching political science. The question of how can I convey a position without overwhelming the students with my own personal position in that. And I think the same goes for philosophy and connects to your question earlier. Whether loving oneself or others is good or bad, how do I teach a child those terms to make up their own conclusion about it without inferring my own point of view into the teaching of philosophy? I think that's also, it's in politics, it's more discreet. I think here, there's political affiliation or certain preferences you could be leaning towards, whereas doing it in the philosophical context is more abstract, and but I think the principles are the same. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like that comparison with politics, that like teaching politics, especially like partisan politics in terms of education at any level. Like if you were to talk to young children or like high school students or adults about that, it does seem to be important to preserve a certain neutrality. Perhaps that you're trying to convey like an understanding of the situation and not adopt a strong partisan position oneself, even though it's acknowledged that one, as a factual matter, almost certainly does have a position. But as an educator, one is invited to sort of take on an anonymous type of stance with regards to it. So I think then philosophy ought to be like that. And I think it maybe ought to be like that more than it is maybe my critique of how philosophy is taught. How I like to think about it is philosophy can also be scary. Philosophy can also be disturbing. Philosophy can also be something that doesn't solve your problem, but it makes your problem worse. You know, like why is it always that philosophy is like a solution that will help you feel better? Maybe it will, but maybe it won't. Because I also think real life is that way. It's like we have this, otherwise philosophy is just like another form of self-help, which I think maybe there's probably more people thinking about philosophy, like all that, the craze around stoicism and stuff, like this kind of like reverence for ancient discipline. You know, it's just people want philosophy to be a form, like, tell me what I can do to be better, to solve my problems. And I just want to listen to you and implement what you have to say. It's like people just want to be spoon-fed a philosophical answer. Whereas if you're actually teaching somebody or inviting them to do philosophy themselves, then you shouldn't spoon feed them an answer. You should, you know, shock them with the question, and then maybe they'll find their own answer. But how I see it is it's more just about getting them to sit with the question itself.
Yeah. So I think in the German context, in the debate of didactics of political science, teaching politics in school, there's in a sense the framework that democracy and the liberal democratic constitution of Germany allows for a range of positions, and one can position oneself in this context and discuss everything that is discussed controversially. But those positions who are against democracy or Menschenwürde, basic human rights, and all of that should be opposed by the educator in a sense. And that's a framework that is clearer or more palpable for politics, but what is the same for philosophy? And well, one could also say if you dig deep enough in the political positions, you always end up at philosophy. Yeah, the source is in a sense philosophy.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like you know, and Germany has a Verfassung, a constitution, and written documents that establish a certain, let's say, like a philosophical position of the state and where it stands on issues. The U.S. has one of these too, and in a sense, with politics, like what the state wants to do, and a well-functioning education system, if you hold that means that there's like a statewide consistency and vision that's implemented. In the US, it's often more fragmented. People want the state to be less involved, but is that the education system would reflect those values. So it makes sense that like you want your education to educate citizens too, to be consistent with the principles of the democracy. But should philosophy be in line with that? Because then if philosophy is asked to do the same thing, and it could do that, it could be like, you know, we're only going to read liberal democratic thinkers or ones that can be kind of read as supportive of that. But then you get into censorship. Like, well, then are you not going to read Thomas Hobbes because he argued for a monarch and rather than a democracy? You know, are you not going to read, you know, Plato's Republic, which actually, you know, ranked democracy below several other forms of government and argued for a different system of government, like Hannah Arendt, you know, like who was critical of democracy and certain things. It's like, there's just, to do that would require this really draconian, totalitarian kind of, you know, trimming of what philosophy has been. That seems just, you know, like inaccurate. And maybe you'd imagine that that's like a censorship that you'd get in like an Orwellian state, or, you know, it's like the worst versions of the Soviet Union or something, like where certain ideas aren't permitted. And the idea of philosophy seems to be to not shy away from certain ideas.
Yeah, in a sense, also the idea of democracy, having people informed about various kinds of philosophical positions and political positions, and nonetheless, at the end, coming to the conclusion that democracy is the system. I think a difference is also that the German education systems and teachers working in Germany are employed by the state.
Yeah, like the philosopher as the civil servant, you know, or the philosophy teacher as the civil servant. Well, let's see here. Why don't we take a quick break? and then we'll come back and we'll spin out more. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with Ivo Martin.
Yes.
Okay, so we're back with Ivo. Ivo, let's talk a little bit. Let's like expand out in the circle of identity with who you are in particular, but also just what else there is to life and to thinking. And so talk about music, like in particular, how do you connect philosophy with music? What does music mean for you? And yeah, just like riff on that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So music is a big part of my life. I love music. I love listening to music. I've grown up with a lot of music, particularly jazz. My father is a saxophone player and also love to have jazz music on in the car. And
okay, alto or tenor? What are those? The two different
alto,
saxes?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
And yeah, I also used to play myself for a couple of years, but then I dropped it. But maybe that's a project I can return to one day. And the connection to philosophy for me personally comes from rap and or poetry in a sense, because I started producing my songs and addressing philosophical topics in a sense that I wanted to explore through music. And yeah, I think rap and philosophy has an interesting oversection in a sense. I think in rap, there's a lot of ideas that can be expressed and can be put in a different kind of form that is way different than an essay would be, or a book in a sense.
But it's still textual, like still requires or involves like the formulating of ideas into words and presenting them.
Absolutely, yes. But it has rhymes, which are also quite nice, and that sonically in a sense. And yeah, it may lack depth, but it may also open up interpretations to, well, various kinds of interpretations to listeners. In the sense that in an essay where you could clarify an idea and be as precise as you, as you attempt to be, a song may invite, or a lyric in a rap, which has a kind of format, may invite to more open interpretations of every listener.
Yeah. Do you see, like, do you understand rap as a genre of poetry with music, or how else would you define rap in terms of maybe its uniquely philosophical ability?
I don't think that it has a unique philosophical ability, but there's the possibility for it. Yeah, one could go into the history of rap, and also in my particular case, growing up in Germany, it is different than the US context of rap. But there are some interesting overlaps, I think, nonetheless, and particularly also in Stuttgart and in Heidelberg when it comes to the German history of rap, being done by people who have history of migration or are kind of outcasts, talking in their raps about their struggles in a sense. Before, like in the US, it became capitalized by big industry and the emergence of gangster rap and all that. I think that plays out parallelly, but still, I think in rap has also an overlap with the tradition of poetry in a sense. And so yeah, I think it can be both. It can be also a form of poetry at times, in which, and poetry has also less forms in a sense than a rap song would have, with a beat and a structure of verse and rhymes.
Well, do you do you produce your own music as well for your raps? Like do you produce your own beats?
Yes, I do that.
Okay.
Yes, I love producing beats. I love finding samples and playing melodies and experimenting with beats in digital audio stations.
You know, like forms of music with lyric and words, and how philosophy can appear there is so interesting, like across history. And like, you know, even, you know, like a lot of ancient cultures, the conveyance of stories and ideas in song and in verse, but also live, you know, with rhythm. Ivo, would you be willing to play for us one of your songs, like as an illustration, since we are a podcast, and we that way we can kind of picture or place into our minds more concretely what an example?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so that's a song called Was ist der Mensch, which is German for what is the human, one of the 5 Kantian questions, and in which I try to playfully engage with this idea of trying to define what the human is and what not, maybe. Okay, should we go right into it?
Yeah, do it.
There are some things other animals do better than you. Some see better, some hear better, and some are stronger. But you're different, because you can think and reason.
Seitdem ich weiß, dass ich nichts weiß, ergibt gar nichts seinen Sinn. Fragen über Fragen, aber die Antworten verschwimmen. Dabei laufen Menschen rum, als wüssten sie alles schon. Sie berufen sich auf Wissenschaft oder auf Religion. Doch dann stelle ich ihnen die Frage, sagt mir, was ist denn der Mensch und gibt es was, das uns von unserer Umwelt abtrennt? Sie sagen, wir seien Gottes Bild, erschaffen durch sein Wort. Mit Seele und Verstand bestimmt für diesen unseren Ort. Seitdem ich weiß, dass ich nichts weiß, muss ich alles hinterfragen. Das ist ziemlich viel Arbeit, aber ich hab halt keine Wahl. Oder gebe ich mich dem hin, was andere für mich bestimmen. Zum Beispiel in meinem System mit prädefinierten Sinn.
For a while, animals dominated, but soon man's natural intelligence came to his rescue. He learned to train and make use of animals for his own benefit.
Seitdem ich weiß, dass ich nichts weiß, brauche ich neues Fundament. Am besten im Zugang, mit dem ich Wahrheiten erkenne. Kann es sowas geben? Wenn ja, vielleicht Vernunft. Nun geht der Depp Begründbarkeit von Normen auf den Grund. Seitdem ich weiß, dass ich Vernunft hat, stoß ich schon auf ihre Grenzen. Erst fühlte ich mich so frei, doch merkt die Triebe, die mich lenken. Jegliche Einsicht erkannte ich erst als rational, doch bei der Umsetzung dessen stoß ich auf Widerstand und Qual. Kant sagt, das sei in mir die Tierheit, erfindet den Begriff. Bewohner zweier Welten, was hier nur den Menschen inne sind. Geb ich mich diesen Trieben hin, bin ich nichts weiter als ein Tier in einer mechanischen Welt, vollkommen determiniert. Doch ist das fair, kann Kant alles so erklären. Ich streichel eine kleine Katze und sie wächst mir an mein Herz. Wir sind beide Tier, aber was ist dann der Mensch? Er hebt sich über andere, indem er sich von allem abgrenzt. Die Krone der Schöpfung zerstört grad unser Paradies. Nicht so vernünftig, die Menschheit der Parasit. Ich streichel durch ihr sanftes Fell, versuche zu verstehen. Wahrscheinlich hat sie so wie ich auch ein magisches Innenleben. Sie fühlt, sie denkt, sie liebt, aber was ist mit Vernunft? Sapiens, der Maßstab der Menschen, vielleicht nur heiße Luft.
Reicht es, den Vernunftbegriff auf Tiere zu erweitern, oder braucht es einen grundlegend neuen Ansatz, unser Verhältnis zur Umwelt zu denken? Und was ergeben sich daraus für Konsequenzen für unser Handeln, insbesondere in Bezug auf die gigantischen Herausforderungen, vor denen wir mit all unseren Mitlebewesen stehen?
Seitdem ich weiß, dass ich nichts weiß, ergibt gar nichts seinen Sinn. Fragen über Fragen, aber die Antworten verschwimmen. Dabei laufen Menschen rum, als wüssten sie alles schon. Sie berufen sich auf Wissenschaft oder auf Religion. Doch dann stelle ich ihnen die Frage, sagt mir, was ist denn der Mensch und gibt es was, das uns von unserer Umwelt abtrennt? Doch dann stelle ich ihnen die Frage, sagt mir, was ist denn der Mensch? Was ist denn der Mensch? Was ist denn der Mensch?
Yeah. It's nice to hear it in its entirety like that too. So, damn, like you want to give us, like, since this is an English language podcast, although I know we have many German speaking listeners.
Yeah, that may have
like
been
you
want to
give us a nutshell.
for
yeah,
the English.
maybe they can follow along. You know, they heard Jiminy Cricket there here and there as well.
Uh-huh.
So what? Give us a like an overview of the concepts that are in there for you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as I said, it's taking on the Kantian question, what is the human? And it plays with it. It plays with the idea that there are religious definitions of what the human is, and there are scientific attempts to account for what the human is. And it tries to lay out what that would entail. And it takes up the Kantian position of the idea of the human as the rational animal, and discusses the problems in a sense of following that through. In a sense, also a problem of logocentrism or anthropocentrism that is focused on human rationality, which is quite an abstract concept.
You wrote it in German initially, right? Like, and let me just like ask in terms of like the relationship between delivery and writing for you, like what's your process with regards to that? Do you like, would you write this entirely by hand or script it out, maybe play with it in your head and then go to perform it and try it out and see how it works? Or would you start with performance and kind of ad-libbing and spontaneity and then write that down? Or is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think it leans more to the second approach. As like coming to rap myself, I started by doing freestyle rap, which I did like with my friends in school during breaks. There would be one person beatboxing or playing a beat on the phone, and then we'd start doing these ciphers, doing freestyle sessions where we're just spitting off the top of our dome and engaging with ideas and playing with the ideas of others. And in a sense, it would turn philosophical at one point, or it would turn absurd maybe, because sometimes, I don't know, have you ever done freestyle rap?
I've done like freestyle poetry or freaking. I've done like improv, like with my acoustic guitar. Actually, with the Kinder philosophy, with the puppet show, I do a lot of that. Just like, you know, you get like a chord sequence going, and then you just invent lyrics as you go. That, you know, so it's kind of like, and I see it as connected to stand-up comedy. One of my first professors, his name's Robert Metcalf at University of Colorado, Denver, but he defined philosophy for me early on as, or the role of being a philosophy professor and teaching philosophy as 1/3 content knowledge. You have to like have read your material and know what you're teaching. And then 2/3 stand-up comedy. Like you just have to engage the class. You have to be up there conveying ideas. And, you know, it's like, I love stand-up comedy and certain comics, you know, it's like people like Robin Williams or I think are deeply philosophical people. And there's a lot of connection between that. So, but part of that is the live aspect. Part of that is the, you know, like performative, spontaneous aspect. And I think that's something that is often missed when we think about philosophy too, just insofar as we tend to focus on books. We read books that have been written for thousands of years or centuries or decades or months, but written down things that are kind of static. And then we debate what they mean. Whereas really, like, if you think about it, like philosophy can, and maybe primarily appears out live in the moment. So, and I mean, you know, when you record music or the recording of your rap, it's like, it's still a document, but the creation of that, the fact that it's rooted in this spontaneous delivery and stuff, I think makes it exciting philosophically.
Yes.
And it's very critical. I guess it's like, you know, it seems you are a critic of those systems. So, but please continue.
No, I wanted to say, I think like freestyle rap or the, as you said, inventing lyrics on the spot. If one tries engaging with it in the beginning, it's hard because you don't know what to say next. But after a certain level, I think, of engagement with doing this practice, these sentences or rhymes come automatically, and then it's in a sense a game. I have a word, a rhyme that comes, and it constrains the way the story goes, and I need to find a sentence or a kind of form that also needs to be grammatically correct that pulls this along. So this would often lead to absurd lyrics. I'd do freestyles with my friends and then talk about absurd worlds and different scenarios and such. But sometimes there's also like interesting philosophical snippets from that, and then I'd save a certain line and try to refine it and think about it and build on these, like take these bits and build them to something that is coherent and works. But I think freestyle is a big part of it. If I were just to sit down with a pen and try to force the rap or the verse, it wouldn't work. I think I need to perform, or this performative aspect is a great deal of it.
So, and of course, there's a relationship there between. I mean, do you understand jazz? You mentioned jazz before. Like jazz seems to have a similar balance of improvisation and structure. And there's like a spectrum, and different pieces and styles and approaches can fit along that. But it's like you need them both at play. Yes,
absolutely. And also, that was just the textual side. I think the same also goes for the production in a sense, although a production is more streamlined of a beat, for instance. But there's also a play of samples and sounds and vocal samples, for instance, that you can use to also like enhance the story you're trying to tell.
Yes. Yeah. And just and I've noticed that with even just like or learning to edit podcasts and YouTube videos the last couple months, that it's way more creative than I expected it to be. Like I've edited things in the past for teaching, but more, I would record something that had a fixed purpose and it would go there. But this doing it as more of an open-ended art, there's just so many decisions that come in the production and the editing and at these different levels that it's. But if you have to be open to spontaneity, it seems, at least for it to be fun. I don't know. I'm not going to say if it's successful or not. I mean, maybe there's no like recipe. You know what I mean? And you can spontaneously take a shit. You know what I mean? I mean, like there's a lot of stuff that you do spontaneous. Just because it's spontaneous doesn't necessarily give it value, but it needs to. It's good to have that harnessed. Okay, Ivo, I want to ask you about something that was apparent in your rap, which is your view of let's call it the human nature relationship. And because in the song, you adopt a critical perspective on this division between the human and the animal, and around the core Kantian question of what is the human. So how do you see that connecting with today in any way? I mean, here you wrote a song that has some historical samples, that has this relating with a historical tradition on this question. Look into the present moment, 2025. You as like a young person, you know what I mean? You got most of your life ahead of you. You have a succulent in the background, it's like there's life. Like you're a living being. Like what's your take on that?
Yeah,
dimension.
So I think the sample I used, the Jimmy the Cricket, in a sense, is an advocate of what may be labeled as anthropocentrism, which is the idea that humans are in the center of the world in all relevant ways. And I think anthropocentrism told the story of progression, of progress, that can also be found in Kant or Hegel, that humans or reason, the idea of reason will unfold itself in a sense which may be more or less linear, but may progress towards an end. And I think now we are at the moment where we realize that this idea of progress runs into problems. On a finite Earth, there's finite resources, and we can continue this path in a sense. And that is almost an existential question in a sense. And the idea I ask in this song is, how do we go away from, how do we change our framework to allow for an alternative to anthropocentrism, or a broadening of the scope, in a sense, that allows us to address these issues. And Kant, I argue, is fundamental in this tradition, as is Jimmy the Cricket, in establishing the idea that humans are the only thing that matters. And in the end, if we don't care about other beings of life around us, we'll be the ones that run into big problems, to put it mildly.
Yeah, it's ironic that Jiminy Cricket is such an advocate of human supremacy, given that, you know, he's basically just like debasing himself. But he does wear clothes, so he's at least humanoid and kind of gets his share, like, by association. Wonderful. Like, I like that idea a lot too, or like recognizing a certain anthropocentrism in the history, and wanting to both identify it and then make space for some alternative or something else. And maybe let me ask you about that. Like, what's your view? If you could say a little bit more about that, like what would you see as that something else? Like, let's assume for sake of argument that, I mean, like, you and I think are of a very similar mind about this, and that there is a problem with the history of human control of the earth and understanding itself as the sort of controlling destiny of the earth, and that we've, as you say, run into a condition of limited resources where we're shattering and kind of destabilizing the planet, but also destabilizing societies and political systems and orders. And it's all this big connected net. So if, for the sake of argument, if we recognize that this is a problem and we want to do something about it, what is the alternative? Like, what, because it's like, you can be critical and have a diagnosis of a problem that is correct and good and, you know, like a robust philosophical treatment of this. But if you only focus on that, unless your view is that, like, it doesn't make sense, or for other reasons, like considering the future, or maybe there is no alternative, like there's a certain, many people would call that nihilism, but just to say that it is just negative and there's no place for considering a positive. But if you assume or have reasons, maybe you're committed to the continuation of the species, maybe you just like the idea. If you want there to be a positive, better thing, like if you want, you know, so you're still progressive in that sense, I'd say if that's the case, you're still in that Kantian Enlightenment shadow, which maybe we should be, like, we should maybe care about the human species and its dignity and humanity and all that. If we do, then we need something else. But the big background question is, can we construct something, or one of the big background questions, can we construct something else without carrying over negative aspects from that past thing that just end up corrupting it and perpetuating it? Is it actually possible to really detach ourselves and get on a solid footing in a new direction?
Yes, to take off where you ended, in a sense, it isn't possible to entirely detach ourselves from our perspective and metaphysical assumptions, in a sense, because we are humans, and that is anthropocentrism on a fundamental sense. But that's just a descriptive level and not yet a normative level. And to address the problem, I think, to pinpoint it, the ideas of rationality and the Kantian tradition that posits humans at the top of the hierarchy and as the sole focus of any moral consideration is inherently something that is vertical. If we try to attempt to extend moral consideration, it is often still along the lines of verticality, giving consideration to that which is close to the human via empathy, maybe those, I don't know, animals that we can relate to.
Yeah, we go like a few notches down the totem pole or
yes.
whatnot, and then just like you guys maybe are included, you great apes,
Understanding
and dolphins,
rationality
and things,
as a spectrum or something, or the trickling down of moral considerations, something like that. But I think the climate crisis is something that prompts us to rethink the way we frame ethical considerations for the sake of humans themselves. The argument I try to explore is, can we create a moral system that can include the most basic forms of life as playing part in it? It is still for the sake of humans, as humans, we cannot abstract entirely away from our position. But if we can at least account for, let's say, unicellular life or plant life, and obviously also animal life, and adopt this and translate it to all the human practices we have, maybe then we can address the climate crisis and still live as humans. It would be under different conditions, I assume. But right now, I think we're in the moment where there isn't even the idea, it isn't even thinkable, because we're still in these frameworks of verticality and anthropocentrism in that sense. What do you make of that?
Life. Like, there seems to be something valuable about life in itself that I'd say most humans would agree with. Like, very few say that they're not pro-life. I mean, everybody says that they're like, in a certain sense, like it's just like valuable, obviously. So there's a sense in which like we can appeal to that. And maybe that's like if we can account for that and then build our way up into a new moral system, then we can build one that's responsible for and to life, and in a way that previous systems have not been. So we can be more life-centric. People talk about moving to be more eco-centric, like to focus more on ecology in the place of the human organism in the non-human environment. And I think it's something similar with that sort of sense. So we could prioritize life and love life. One problem still then becomes like, what cuts are we still going to make in our practical day-to-day lives? What sort of form of living is conceivable that has the starting point of respecting all life? And certainly there are many religious systems and philosophical systems around the world that do, in a certain sense, like try to respect life in their own way. Depends how you define life too. Is like, is life created by a god, or is life something that emerged randomly, or, in the history of cosmic natural history? Like what exactly it is about it, and then why should we value it? All those sort of questions are embedded in there. Then how do you bridge the gap between that theoretical project and that commitment, say turning to life and being open to life, with the fact that, as you say, we're very much embedded in these frameworks that are incredibly hostile to life, if you want to put it that way. Like, we're in the Anthropocene and rocketing further and further. And like Trump and Trumpism and what that means for the US and the globe. Just yesterday, the US Congress passed, and then Trump is today. 4th of July, we're recording this on 4th of July, you know what I mean? Independence Day. Woo! I don't know whether to celebrate or to, like, punch myself in the stomach. But on this very day, Trump's going to sign it into law, and it just dismantled all of the green energy subsidies that had been put in place by Biden, and also a number that were in place during Trump's first administration. And it's really going to, diminish incredibly the U.S. and, by extension, because of how the international politics and economics of this work, the global sort of progress on the green energy transition and the move away from decarbonization. So if you just look at the ground and you say, it's not only that it's bad, but it's getting worse. Like, we're accelerating into the bad point with regards to this. So how do you clear that gap that it's like we as philosophers can conceive of theories and we can almost glimpse an alternative, but the moment we're in seems to be as far from that alternative as we've ever been, and it looks like it's just continuing to spiral off.
Yeah, well, answering that question is answering the the problem of our century, maybe. So I don't have it, but there is a paradox in that I
not yet. Maybe I'll check back in a couple of years.
Yeah, let's do a follow-up episode. In the essay I recently wrote, I point at this in my conclusion. In the sense, I argued that the metaphysical assumptions that humans have about how they understand the world and humans in relation to other entities in the world influences their moral considerations and their practices and all of that. And I pinpoint one historical moment being the agricultural revolution, where there was a transition from holistic metaphysics to exceptionalist metaphysics, and also religions, exceptionalist religions in the sense that they posit the human as an exceptional being in contrast to other beings, and also the idea of rationality in itself from ancient Greek philosophy and the tradition of humanism. All of that is we could label as an exceptionalist framework. And the change was because humans domesticated animals and plants, and it radically changed the way humans lived and their conditions of life, from before being embedded as part of a hierarchy of life and being hunted by the saber tooth or whatever, so being out there, and then settling down and domesticating plants and animals. And that changed their way they understood themselves and also enabled this tradition. And now I think we're still in this tradition. It goes deep. It goes back more than 10,000 years in a sense, if we really open it up. And now the IPCC report and other research suggests that our rooms for freedom and liberties, in a sense, and the way the privileges we enjoy in liberal societies and the achievements we had with that were achieved by the humanist project, which I like, may be threatened by more fights over resources and crises worsening. And if the crisis accelerates, maybe then at one point there may be another paradigmatic shift which leads us to understand, no, we are still connected and interdependent with all these other systems and beings, but that may already prove too late. So that's the paradox I wanted to pinpoint here. How can we initiate this shift, if that's even necessary, this shift in metaphysical assumptions, to put it maybe theoretically? How do we initiate that preemptively?
Yes, I guess to the best of our ability, right? Or like if it's, I like, there's like an ambiguous note there of the sense of, and it may be too late, but you don't know if it's too late. In a certain sense, it's like there's still a drive to do, like I admire and salute your optimism there, perhaps. Maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know.
Well,
the sense,
I might have no choice. I think as a nihilist, it's, yeah. But how is the saying? Yeah. Better, it's better to have lived as an optimist and be disillusioned at the end of your life, rather than having lived as a pessimist and being confirmed in your assumption.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's I wiser words have never been spoken in certain ways. So, yeah, but yeah, and as somebody, I'm like a parent, and so that factors into like what we think about the future. There's so much there. So let me then pivot to ask you this. So it's like, and you can connect this to what we were just talking about or to anything at all, but what are some recommendations you might have to share with the group about anything at all? Books, films, albums, anything like that. It could be other genres of things. Like if you want to hold up a painting and describe it, that's totally cool too. But
has anybody ever done that yet?
Not yet, but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I'm trying to work on that. You know,
I may have a new category. I'll get to that as my third. But first, I'll start with the movie Triangle of Sadness. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's
I've seen Triangle of Happiness and Circle of Loneliness, but not.
Aha, okay. Those might be references I may add to the movie. But Triangle of Sadness, it's other than its title suggests, it's a dark satire of the ultra rich. So it's set on one of these yachts, and it plays on the social dynamic between those who are served and those who work for them. And I don't want to take the plot away, but I think it's comparable to the South Korean film Parasite. But rather than being a horror version of it, it's more a dark comedy, maybe. So that's it's a great first watch because you never know where the movie goes, and it's very, very enjoyable to watch. And
wonderful.
Even on the second watch, it offers like great possibilities for a discussion with friends and all.
Should I watch it with my 8-year-old, or is he a little too young for it?
I think that may be a bit too young for it. So there are some scenes they're not PG. Okay. I don't know. Yes. The second may be I'm recently rereading a book from my childhood that is called Krabat by Ottfried Preußner. I don't know are you familiar with it?
Yes, I've Preußler also wrote the kleine Gespenst, right? And,
yes, I think so.
Räuber Hotzenplotz or whatever. So one of these German authors of a lot of things. So, but Krabat, I think, is a little bit lesser known. But what's I think it's like maybe it's like we considered reading Krabat with our son, but it's like he was a little spooked out by it.
It's a bit dark actually. So it's Preußner is a children's book writer. And Krabat is something that's actually also read in German schools as part either of the German class or the ethics class. And I'm rereading it right now, and it is quite dark. So it's set it's not really specified, but in the German Middle Age, and is about an orphan boy who is put into slavery in a sense and has to work at a mill, and it's really dark, but then he strives for freedom and changes things, to put it in a nutshell. And it has some kind of dark sorcery and mystery, and is very well written. Yeah. So
yeah, that sounds perfect. I'm gonna go read that right now. to hell with anybody else. Very good.
Yes, and the third is a video game I'd like to recommend. It's called It Takes Two, and it's a game designed to be played by couples, I think. So I'm playing it with my partner right now, and although she doesn't have a background in playing video games, I used to play back in the days, and that's a great opportunity. So it's designed in the way that if one person has some video game experience and the other person hasn't, you're still forced to, in a sense, work together, solve puzzles, and it's telling a great story. So have you played any video games at all?
I have. I actually have played that game once.
Oh,
like when I've some of my like very good old friends from high school and such. When I'm back in the States and visit with them, they game more than I do. So I've actually played that game with a buddy of mine. Cool. And it's like you're like a husband and wife in the game, right? So like as I recall, and I would highly recommend it too. But it's like the cooperation, the fact, because so many 2-player games you're competing against each other, competing against something else, but finding actual cooperative experiences where people bind together, it can be very refreshing. And it also helps dissuade this idea that video games are like just for like lonely basement dwellers, like, you know, that it can be a way of being social and of, you know, even of creating love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they came out with a new game like recently called Split Fiction. That's a story of two women there that you play, and that it has the same principle. Like you have to work together to fight the bosses or solve the puzzles and finish the game.
It's taken two of us to do this podcast, and we've done it split screen, so I appreciate it. So, well, thanks so much for the recommendations and just for this wide ranging and really interesting chat, Ivo. So we'll talk to you some other time.
Yeah, it was nice being on here. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation with
Ivo Martin.
The Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast is a co-production of Deadbeat Media and the Museum Hegel-Haus, Stuttgart. For more Deadbeat content and to chip in to keep the channel going, check us out at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. For more about the Museum Hegel-Haus, check out hegelhaus.de. That's HEGEL-HAUS.de. Adios and auf Wiedersehen.